our next panel, which is called Player's Perspective. And what we're going to do is learn about how soccer and basketball are contributing towards soaring interest and growth in the women's professional sports industry. So, to moderate our panel, we'll bring up Jasmine Robinson, managing partner of Monarch Collective. And our esteemed speakers, Jayne Appel Marinelli, Senior Vice President of Player Relations at the WNBPA Players Association. I said Appel, is it Appel?
It is.
I'm so sorry. As someone it gets called Ellie all the time, please.
You can do that with Ellie the elephant.
That's right. Well, I was going to say Ellie the elephant has kind of like cornered the market on Ellie, so I'm fine with it now. Megan Perry, who is the head of professional basketball at Athletes Unlimited. And Becca Roux, Executive Director of the United States Women's National Team Players Association and board member of One Team Partners.
Great. Well, really excited to be leading this panel. So I lead an investment fund called Monarch Collective, focused on investing in women's sports. But I also think in addition to playing that kind of owner role, come from the player perspective role because my dad played in the NFL. And so I feel like when we were talking about panels, I was like, I want to lead this one. So excited to be having this conversation. Megan, thought maybe I'd start with you because I think the model at Athletes Unlimited is a little different than what we'll hear from Jayne and Becca. So maybe walk us a little bit through the AU model and how governance and player involvement works.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be able to be here to represent Athletes Unlimited, Athletes Unlimited Pro Basketball specifically. But for those of you that may not be familiar with us, we are a network of professional women's sports leagues. And what's different about AU, we call it AU for short, and AU Pro Basketball specifically, we put the players at the center of everything. And we don't just talk about that, we walk that in the form of the center of our governing model is around our players, our Player Executive Committee. We call it PEC for short. And so every day, literally every day, we work with our PEC on every single business decision that is required to put on our season. So for example, our Player Executive Committee for AU Pro Basketball consists of Lexi Brown, she's our chair, Sydney Colson, Teresa Plaisance, and Rebecca Harris. And I work in collaboration with them every single day on everything from what are we going to wear on the court, to what time we want to play, to our roster selection and who we bring into our community. And it's something that is unique and I think a little bit different from traditional leagues in that structure in that we put the players first. We recognize the value of their voice, the value of their input, and their savvy business minds to be able to contribute to the experience that we want to build collectively. We see them as partners, and that is something that's unique and innovative. It's starting with AU in 2022 when basketball first came on board. We've been doing it since then, and we're really excited about how that model is going to continue to grow. We've found a lot of success with it.
Absolutely. I think it's a really exciting model. Maybe sticking on basketball, we'll go to you next, Jayne. Obviously, it's a really exciting moment in the WNBA from the Liberty winning in Game 5 earlier this week through to the player opt-out announcement around the WNBA, WNBPA, CBA. So maybe I'd love to hear from you just how did this process go? How did the players sort of arrive at this point today where they're opting out of the 2020 CBA?
It's a lot of letters, isn't it?
Yes.
Listen, my job and role at the PA and with the rest of our staff allows us to serve the players first. They are the number one stakeholder, they are the union. And so when it came to having the opportunity to opt out of the CBA, it wasn't as easy as waking up and sending out a text message and saying, you in or you out. Our players are extremely smart. They rely on a team of advisors that evaluated information, brought it to the players, presented it to the players talk to us, and then we get off the phone, they talk to themselves. I know because I've been a part of the player leadership when I played, and was a part of those conversations without staff, and now being on staff, I'm like, what are they saying? But I was extremely proud of them finding out the news. You know, we as a staff, we sat in the room and we found out the results of the vote at the same exact time, and 1 hour later we had our girl Chanae breaking it on ESPN, so that was, it was great. They are looking to be a part of the growth that they have helped create. And they are looking to build a new economic model. They're looking for lifelong benefits, continuing to improve upon, family planning and opportunity for those players, and just looking to be paid what they deserve.
Fantastic. It's an exciting time, and I know we'll be really curious to follow how it unfolds. Becca, maybe going over to you. You lead a union of some of the top soccer players in the world, and led the landmark pay equity fight, which we were noticing there's a nice photo of up on the video boards as well. Curious to get your perspective, having been through all of that and really just observing the collective bargaining dynamics in the market at large. Like, where do you think we are today with collective bargaining dynamics in women's sports or in sports more broadly?
I don't know that I'm educated enough to speak on it so broadly as all of sports, but I can probably speak to women's sports. First, I am somewhat jealous that they're going into bargaining. I actually really enjoyed it. I took this job in 2017, and naively, when I was 31, I just left McKinsey as a consultant and was like, oh, this will be done in 6 months. 6 years later, we finally did achieve equal pay and sign that equal pay CBA. But part of what I love about collective bargaining is the players have a seat at the table, and it sounds like Athletes Unlimited has figured out a way to do that without having to have the union management dynamic. But a CBA is simply a strategic planning document. Like, if you were to look at it like that and everybody come to the table and go, where are we trying to get to and how do we all work together to get there, to make sure also everybody's feeling respected, people are getting their fair share, like, it can become a very different dynamic. Because then you're talking about expanding the pie versus a turf war and how can I win in this one myopic area versus like a collective strategic plan. And so I hope that everybody is approaching the table in this way. So I don't know if it's a problem, but I do think in women's sports and generally there is a more collective nature. We haven't completely crossed over into all the capitalistic ways of men's sports, which is both, we are getting there, by the way, if you see some of these valuations, but there is a lot that the WNBPA and the players can achieve together. And I would say if I was focusing on it, like, what is the strategy? How do you find those areas where you can align incentives? And, players like, media is what drives this business. So how are we going to get media to pay more money? Because the stat that was thrown out that the WNBA is getting 4% of the revenue, but they have 30% of the viewership is in the NBA. How do you fix that? What is going to make it such that the work you're doing is actually driving that revenue? So, and then also, you better get yours. Because one thing that players don't participate in is the equity and the expansion values. And that is a place where owners are going to get theirs. So you have to get yours, and the owners need to come to the table and go, we want these players to feel like they are part of it. And as Jayne, you said, experiencing the growth that they've helped build. So I don't know that there's a problem, but I'm excited for them overall. It's going to be a fun year.
Yeah, I love that framing of it's really about how do you think of it as a strategic planning document. Maybe, is there an example when you were going through your CBA negotiations where you're able to kind of like set that strategic viewpoint?
Yeah, I mean, these are long documents and not all of it is public. We have also a commercial agreement, and a lot of it is in outlining the duties that the players will do and how they can then get paid for it. And sometimes you like to build in like appearances and all these things, and if players don't feel like they're actually getting paid to do that because it's just baked in, they don't want to do it. They're not going to show up and do it well. And so then you have to step back and go, all right, how do we actually better incentivize this behavior such that they want to do that? And so we have done that. We have a commercial revenue share, and it's really easy for me to draw a line that says, players, you're doing this, and then at the end, it's a little bit delayed because we pay it out basically 6 months in arrears because you have to do all the accounting of it. But you get a nice little check for 6 figures for some of them, and like that is going to really be helpful. And that's not just the revenue share, but it's also ticket share and some other things. And so it is really trying to think about how do you incentivize the right behaviors and make sure that people feel like what they're doing is being respected and adequately paid.
Yeah, absolutely, especially. Oh.
Can I add to that? I think that's beautiful and something that we experience hands-on every single day within our Athletes Unlimited structure is that like, the middleman's cut out. So we're going direct to player. And I think when you get the player buy-in, right? They are your best assets because they are the ones that will advocate for what it is that they want to do. And so they show up more, and then they bring other people along with them. And it creates a culture overall of buy-in and excitement, which we found to be, I think, really helpful and something that it has been pretty innovative in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. So much more of those direct conversations. I'm curious with AU, I feel like you all have been really sort of charting this new model altogether. Starting that way, I think there are a lot of sort of flexibility or benefits that you have, but I think also there's some of, you make a strategy and then you have to actually see what happens as it goes. So I'm curious to ask you, Megan, what hasn't gone as expected, or what have you sort of changed or adapted as you've gotten deeper into operating AU Pro Basketball?
Sure. So we're entering our 4th season of AU Pro Basketball. This will be my 2nd season with Athletes Unlimited. And I would say part of the fabric of who we are and what we do, we are constantly in conversation with our players. We meet on a weekly basis with our PEC, if not more often than that, in different chats and sorts. But the constant feedback that we get, it's not just about like at the end of the season or once a year. We are always learning and hearing from them about what they see that we could do differently, what they think is going well. So, it's everything from the competition on the floor and learning about what things they think are of value, right? And what things support them and making a better product on the floor. It's off court. What kind of community we're shaping, right? And which individuals and which kind of what stakeholders are a part of our community. We listen to that on an ongoing basis. And part of the feedback that we get from them is that what they really like is how responsive we are, right? So it's not 2 years down the road, it's next week we're talking about it and we're looking to implement it for the next time that we're together in season. So from competition to just how we're overall positioned and what our messaging is, we engage them in that process. It's a constant feedback process, which I find to be very refreshing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like, as things evolve and change, being able to move that nimbly is a real benefit.
Yes, and we know that I was a college basketball player myself and still have that athletic identity and mentality, but they're not patient, right? They want instant results right now. And so to be able to engage them in the process to help them, bring them along and help them see, right? Kind of like how the pizza is made as you're going along has been, I think, really eye-opening for them and it's helps our overall business.
Absolutely. Jayne, I'm curious, we talked a little bit about the opt-out process. Now that players have opted out, I think it's safe to say that probably a good bit of that decision is tied to compensation and how we get the players paid more. So maybe talk to me about how important it is that athlete compensation really flows through at this stage in the league and how that flows through to building the WNBA brand, building the league overall.
The players, they are the product. They are the value in the league, and you need them in order to have a successful league go on. I said earlier that this is my 3rd negotiations, 1 as a player and 2nd now as staff. And you can already see the shift of happening where when I was in 2014, it was, okay, well, we're grateful we have a place to play and we'll still have to go overseas, but like we're glad we have a place to play, to now, you need us and we deserve this money and you have to find the money to pay us because you need us. And I think it's a much more powerful narrative. And it's also starting to change on kind of the investor side of changing the narrative of we should invest in women's sports because it's the right thing to do versus we should invest in women's sports because we want to. We want to be a part of this huge movement going forward. And that starts with supporting the players, so.
Yeah, absolutely. And how much of this discussion, sort of getting back to Becca's point on growing the pie, how much of the discussion is on growing the pie and how there are levers at this time when fandom is an all-time high and, new media deal and all of that, that you're really thinking about how do we build this league together?
Yeah, I mean, it's been growing. This past year definitely had extremely high numbers, but, since 2020 and the bubble where everyone had access to watch our players who sacrificed during COVID to go into a bubble without their families, without their friends, playing in front of no fans. It benefited them and it benefited the league, and it kind of was a kickoff point to our players are still playing and you can support them and get to know them because let's be real, everyone else was sitting in their house, isolated from everyone else. So it gave an opportunity for us to see this kind of continuous growth over the last 4 years, capped off with this year's numbers and this year's media deal. And the upside is just going to keep going up. So I'm excited.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think to your point, the growth has been happening for a long time. And, you know, I think probably most people in this room are extremely bullish that that growth is going to continue to come. So it's an exciting moment. Becca, I'd love to shift over to you. We've talked a lot about earnings and compensation. Obviously, that's a really big piece of this. But another topic that I know I hear a lot when I'm talking with teams and athletes in the US, in Europe, and other regions is really about schedule load, international calendar versus club calendar. Like, what do you think maybe needs to change, or how do we sort of land in a good spot on this topic of scheduling, and how much is the right amount to be playing?
For some background, I think it's so fascinating to watch the WNBA, and they do their all-star match between the WNBA All-Stars and the Olympic team. I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like, they do such a good job of actually intertwining these two worlds, whereas in the club and country world of soccer, they are pretty separate. Like, we have international windows dictated by FIFA, and then there's the club game. And yes, our players play in two different places. And what we've seen on the men's side, and now we're seeing more and more on the women's side, is that there is just more and more games being added. Everybody wants, the one place you can't grow the pie is time. That is like a finite resource for everybody. And so the calendar is getting more and more full. And I think what we'll see is there's just going to be more and more, and we already are seeing it, player injuries. You know, we used to be in a world where the NWSL was 6 months. Some of our players would go play in Australia or other leagues similar to the WNBA, or we had a lot more national team camps that were outside of FIFA windows. Our players, and myself included, as well as with the NWSLPA, we pushed, and the NWSL pushed to make this season longer such that then players had one place that they played. Maybe that's where the W is eventually heading to. But then that also means that, like, we have a 6-week off season that we have to fight for. And really, I think that's getting eroded to 4 weeks. Like, there is not a lot of time in the calendar. So I don't know that I'm telling you many solutions. I'm just describing the problems so far. I don't know that there is a ton of solution. I think on the men's side, what you see is they have really deep rosters. And so if I was thinking about in a CBA context and what players need, like, players, they're really good at taking care of their bodies, and I think there's more and more science, and thankfully there's more and more research being done on the women's side. There needs to be more of what women, professional and elite athletes need. And so I think if I was to say what a solution is, it is we need more research on how players that are women players can take care of themselves, but also probably deeper rosters, which also means more investment. Because if you want players to play in all these different competitions, both club and country, and we're seeing it even on the W side where they're adding in season competitions as well, players need to rest. You're going to have to rotate the roster, which is actually good for the game overall because then it develops more players. And as you have expansion teams, then there's a deeper roster to pull from. But that it is time is a finite resource, and I don't have any grand solutions for that.
Well, we'll keep working on that. Yeah. Megan, I'm curious, as WNBA continues to grow, player salaries grow up. I mean, Becca a little bit just alluded to this, but the dynamic of wanting to play in one league and then play in other competitions, those dynamics could shift. I'm curious what your view is as WNBA player salaries go up, how Athletes Unlimited sort of fits in and continues to be this real positive for the athletes involved.
Yeah, sure. When I think about the landscape of women's sports, and then specifically within basketball, right, there's this explosion that's happening. And I think that's a good thing. I think there is room for many options. Like, when I think about Athletes Unlimited, one of our primary missions is to service our players. And I think the WNBA has the same mindset and the same mission. And there is space for us. We are strategically positioned in the off-season of the WNBA to provide that platform, that domestic platform for players to be able to play 5-on-5 basketball. it is an option because there's so much demand. There's so much talent out there to be able to provide that option so that these players can continue to perfect their craft. That demand's not going away. And I think there's also recognition, right, with the new prioritization rule within the WNBA that it is to their benefit to have the opportunity for players to be able to stay home, be here domestically, and to be able to train in that off season. So there is space for AU. We have, I said we're going into our 4th season. So we are already, I think, where the market is heading and trending towards. And so as the pie continues to grow and hopefully salaries continue to rise, I think we become even more attractive to players and to, honestly, to brands and those that want to engage players at a time when traditionally they have been unavailable because either they're playing overseas or have some other commitments. But we offer another opportunity and space for that. So I think it works for all.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the point on brands is a really good one too, where it's, how do you have this sort of year-round programming and way to tell stories when, the WNBA season isn't going to be year-round. So that makes a ton of sense.
Absolutely.
I'm curious, we've talked a lot about sort of athlete goals as if they are sort of one holistic thing and always lined up. But, in actuality, there's a real, I think, breadth of athlete goals, desires, and sort of bringing all of those together, I think, is one of the interesting elements of this. So maybe, Becca, starting with you, I'm curious how you dealt with maybe different viewpoints or perspectives and really bringing all of that together into sort of a single strategy.
I think we have the benefit of a smaller union, smaller membership, so we could actually get into a room and do prioritization workshops of everybody gets stickers, go tell me what you care about, because we'd have 50 issues different up on the walls, and they would do that. But I think there's always going to be different frameworks everybody takes. At the end, you need to have your must-haves, your nice-to-haves, and your luxury items. And there's also, I think, a benefit in thinking about what does actually cost money and what doesn't. And sometimes there's control or there's power, and that doesn't always cost money. It just becomes something like one thing our players really cared about was they wanted their schedule. They wanted it 3 weeks before camp started. So then if they did get called in, they could know what they needed. They could organize meetings around the camp schedule. So it's figuring out what those types of things are. And then when you get into a lot of the other stuff, and yes, no, there was a lot of disagreement sometimes. Google Docs were our friends. When we would do voting on Google Docs, and we'd outline the issues, pros, cons, and we'd have players vote. But I'm going to add one other thing. If we are going to continue to expand the schedule, players, in addition to research and having big diva rosters, I would say one thing that really benefited from us that we really fought for was better working conditions. The players needed better flights. If they're going to be traveling these long distances, they needed that. They needed their own room so they could just have their own space to recover. All those things cost money. Those are on the cost side of things. But that was one, we could have the coalition around those types of things because that is what impacted players' day-to-day lives. And then if there was some other stuff, we would vote.
Yeah. Absolutely. We like to talk about compensation, but it's really about what's the holistic experience. Jayne, I'm curious, a similar question. Either during your playing days, when you were going through CBA negotiations, or today, how do you think about sort of forging coalitions and alignment around that?
I love the war room. I love when when we're in our own room, just union, just players, and hearing everyone's different perspectives. We've had conversations where players do not feel the same way, and that's, I think, what makes our union and our players so powerful, is that they're taking everyone's perspective, they're being authentic to themselves. But when we leave that room and we go back to the table, we're one voice, and everyone can at least understand where all the other players were coming from and be maybe willing to give on, okay, well, I gave to you on this one, so you got to help me get to this point. But I think that's what makes the W players so powerful, is that they're willing to listen to the rest of their colleagues and come to the table as one united voice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, in moving this ecosystem forward, I think, it's about the athletes having that one voice, hopefully that voice really lining up and aligning with leagues and owners, and just really seeing how we can all grow the pie together. So thank you all for joining this conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.